You're going to love this one, ladies and gentlemen. On this week's episode of I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, Lance Pierce, CEO of a number of organizations, is going to share his leadership, insight, and expertise with you. You're going to want to be sure to hear this one. So enjoy this interview with Lance. On this week's episode of I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I'm interviewing a friend and one heck of a leader, Lance Pierce. Lance, I've known for a number of years, and I'm just going to stop right there. And Lance, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us, everybody, a little bit about your background, your recent leadership role at NetHope, and what the future holds.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to work with you, as we've done in various capacities over the years. So it's really great. And congratulations, by the way, on the growing audience for the podcast. I hear a number of people who are saying, by the way, did you hear Michael's podcast? If you've listened to that particular episode, so that's so really well done on that also. So no, it's a pleasure to be here. Let's see where to begin. The beginning of the end. I'll start at the head and work my way back. So I am most recently the CEO of NetHope, a role that I just wrapped up at the end of last month after 5 years. NetHope is a membership nonprofit made up of the largest international nonprofits in international development, humanitarian relief, and global conservation. And it was founded 24 years ago as a partnership with the tech sector. So the members are the large international NGOs that you've heard of: Red Cross, CARE, Save the Children, Oxfam, International Rescue Committee, and so on. And the partners are Microsoft and Cisco and Salesforce and AWS and all of the other tech companies that you know and that people use. And so I've just completed 5 years there. We can talk a little more about some of the work that we did at NetHope, but this is my I have a little bit of a NetHope origin story, as many people do, as you'll find. So I remember where I was around the time NetHope was founded. So NetHope was founded in the early 2000s, and at that time I was actually working in the tech sector on Wall Street as a consultant. I had a number of different companies, an international real estate firm. I had one of the global investment banks as a client. I had a large beer company as a client. And we were building digital products and services for in the dot-com era for these companies. And I remember when NetHope was founded, and I saw some of the press releases, and I was thinking, wow, that would be a really fascinating place to work. I'd like to work there someday. And so 20 years later, I got the job offer to go do that. So never say never is one of the lessons here. But before NetHope, I actually worked for 15 years in the sustainable finance and climate policy space. So I actually ran a nonprofit, CDP North America. So CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. I was the president and CEO of the U.S. 501c3 arm of CDP. And those of you who work in that space may be aware that most of the investable products products that you can invest in the public markets that are low carbon. So if you invest in a low carbon index of some kind, those are almost always underpinned by CDP data. So CDP is the largest voluntary environmental disclosure platform for companies, cities, supply chains around the world. At the time I was there were 6,000 or 7,000 companies disclosing through CDP. I think now that's north of 12 or 13,000. There were investors who were there in the 90 trillion range of assets under management, who were engaging with companies around improved water stewardship, deployment of cleaner energy sources, and things like that. So I worked in the climate and sustainability space for about 15 years. There was a period of time before that, in the late 90s and early 2000s, as I mentioned, I did work in the private sector. I was a corporate consultant and a corporate social responsibility executive. Then prior to that, I actually ran my own small company I was living in New York at the time, and I was a consultant to the UN system. So I had UN agencies as my clients. I did communications. I did marketing. We did an early audio stream out of Lincoln Center for one of my clients, which is an arts nonprofit back in the '90s when before that was really a thing, and when a lot of people still had dial-up, myself included. So you can imagine what kind of issue that was. And so that was a time when I ran my own small business and was a consultant, worked with a variety of clients. It was New York, so you had in the '90s, and I had a chance to do a variety of things, which was appealing at the time, including produce some documentaries and in addition to the media and communications work and some of the training design, course design, program design work that I did. And then I started my career as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the rural Philippines, and worked a couple of different sites. One of them being a mountain site with a group of farmers in an integrated agroforestry project that was trying to do income generation. Was trying to build a community center around the facility that was built up in the mountains, and also trying to bring in health services periodically, because this was a place that was a couple of hours walk from the nearest road. So a lot of things there. So it was and I went from there and moved to New York City. So it was kind of a big gap there. But yeah, no, I've been really privileged to have a really interesting career. I've done a lot of work that I, imagined that I wanted to do as a young person. I set out and I said I'd like to do some work with either with or for the UN system, and I've been privileged to be able to do a lot of that over the years. I wanted to do work on public policy and help both domestically and internationally, and I've had an opportunity to work on those sorts of things. I've worked on both social impact and environmental issues. In the course of my career, I've done a lot of work in partnership with companies. That's also something that I've really valued. I know a lot of times, sometimes for valid reasons, the not-for-profit sector will sort of set companies off to the side. Sometimes they'll also set government off to the side, but I'm very inclusively minded when it comes to that stuff. I feel like you need all the stakeholders at the table. So if the problem's really sufficiently big enough or pervasive enough, you need companies, you need civil society, you need government, you need citizens, not just the organizations themselves around the table, and that will give you a much better shot at actually creating something that's got longevity to it and might produce some lasting change. So anyway, I've really been privileged and fortunate to be able to do a variety of things, and to have worked with some really amazing people along the way, which kind of goes without saying, because we don't do anything by ourselves. Even as a leader, as a CEO, you don't really accomplish some things you can accomplish by yourself, but most things you accomplish through others. You work through others, you work with others, you work in partnership with people, and so I've been really fortunate to have had a terrific ride so far, and it's not over yet.
No, absolutely. I certainly hope it's not over yet. And what a career you've had already. And in each of those careers, you've ascended to leadership roles. So, Lance, I'm curious, is there a Lance Pierce leadership philosophy? How do you approach leadership?
I wouldn't call it an organized philosophy per se, but I'm a big believer in the idea of beginner's mind. When people talk about how you approach a task, you can approach it, I'm the expert and I know, and therefore why don't people just get on board? Because I know, right? Of course, isn't that obvious? And that's, sometimes that's useful, but more often than not, every situation you encounter is different, or it's got its own unique flavor. And so I try to make a point of going in and being, having a listening like I'm a beginner, to really try to be able to understand everything that's going on. And then from there, you can really start to build. You can start to figure out where, where people are and how do you engage them and what's important to them and, what are the trains coming down the track at you that, if you stop and pause, you can actually hear the whistle and, you're standing on the tracks. And so you do need to, anticipate and plan for some of those things. Um, but it's, and I don't mean, I'm not, certainly don't want to be dismissive of expertise and coming in with a background and experience, because that's also obviously necessary for the role. Um, but I just would caution people with showing up and leading with that, because it's, you may be right, but in many instances you may not be. And I'm a big believer you show up with beginner's mind, and if you do that, then you can really work with people to figure out together what it is that needs doing.
And you've worked in both the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector, more in the nonprofit sector. So you've observed a lot of leaders. What makes for an effective nonprofit leader?
There are. I'm gonna oversimplify here, and say that there are. There's some leaders in the space. Well, first of all, most people in the not-for-profit space are very mission driven. Right. So you choose. Some people are really serious about this. It's a calling. It's a thing that you do because you couldn't imagine doing anything else, or you see that things need changing, or things need fixing, or people need help, or places need help, and so people are drawn to it for all those reasons, and so there are some nonprofit leaders for whom, and I think this is a little less true now, but certainly when I was coming up, there was an older generation of leaders who were very insistent on, you're here for the mission and let's go. And what do you mean you're tired? And why are you unhappy? That other people want your job, right? And you have a chance to help people. What is wrong with you that you're not on board all the time? And 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 I can appreciate that mindset, because sometimes you do have to push through, right? The world is not set up to give us everything we want, and it's not set up automatically to produce beneficial outcomes for everybody. So sometimes you do have to push. You've got to break some things, and so I appreciate that mindset. But it's the leaders who aren't always able to get outside of that, that I think over time can be less effective, right? It's because people are there because they do care about the cause, or they care about the issue, and they care about all of that, but they may not be in a position to have place so much of their time, energy, and selves into it in that way. People have complex lives. They've got care they have to provide. They've got other people that their children to raise, their parents to take care of. There are, there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances, and so it's not that if people are not, in there all the time, 100%, that they're not committed. It just means that they've got other things going on in their lives. And I've seen some nonprofit leaders, struggle with that, because they some don't understand the fact that, well, you've got to be a well-rounded person in addition to being this passionate, committed advocate for your issue. And so I think people that come in and they're able to really balance those things, and they're able to understand their people, and they're able to, but then always point it back to the mission, right? It's you work there for the mission, so eventually you've got to get back to the mission. You can't also be a leader who gets lost in all of the need for care, and the fact that this person's upset and that thing isn't working, and we need this event to go and it didn't go, and you can get lost in that level of detail also. You've got to connect with your people where they are, and you've got to point the conversation back to the mission or the task at hand, because that's why you're all there. And I've observed some really, my cartoonish stereotype that I just laid out about certain nonprofit leaders aside, I've observed some people do that brilliantly over the course of my career that, we really are able to, I see you, I hear you, I get it, we've got to do this. Now, this is what's in front of us. And if we do this, this gets us back on track for all the other people we're trying to help. And that's why we're here.
Yeah, I like how you're tying everything to mission. And so I'm going to flip the tables a little bit just because you've been a CEO, you've worked with nonprofit boards because you've had to report to them. What makes for an effective nonprofit board member?
I think the best board members that I've seen are the ones that really understand and prioritize their duty of care to the organization, because that's a legal obligation in most places, that if you're on a board, you have a duty of care to the organization, that you also really see and understand that you have a fiduciary role, that you are the person who is responsible. If the organization doesn't make payroll, in some sense, it comes back to you. If it doesn't, if the organization gets sued, in some sense, it comes back to you. And so that sense of your fiduciary duty to the organization, having that front and center, also I think makes for a really strong board contributor. And the other one is sort of recognizing that one of your jobs is to be the kind of the not the risk manager per se, but the overseer of the family of risks for the organization, right? That's a thing that you need to have on your in your field of awareness. You need to understand what those are. And so the board members that I've seen that are the, and of course being a great person really helps, right? So some people have abrasive personalities and they're fabulous board members, wonderful board members. Some people it's wonderful also if you're a really good colleague and a good person alongside that. But the people I've found who really internalize those things and kind of ground their practice in that are the ones that I've found over the long run are very effective, because some boards, mature boards usually don't slip into management. But because it's governance, right? And there's a difference. Governance is the rules, our operating procedures, our risk envelope, our resource envelope. It's our diplomatic presence. It's all of those things. And so the members who really understand the difference between governance and management and decide, well, we've hired a team of professionals to go out and whose job it is to manage. And so we need to trust them and let them manage. And our job is to support them in any way we can. And when people sort of internalize that, mindset, either just through experience or because they're naturally inclined that way, you can usually walk right in and immediately get down to work on the important issues, the real issues, all of those sorts of things.
And how do you suggest a CEO work with a board, a nonprofit CEO? How might they work with a board? How the frequency of interactions, the preparation, how does that work?
You have to have a truth-based relationship with your board. And you need to ascertain the degree to which your board has an appetite for the truth. Because some boards, and again, I'm using words that probably need more definition here. It's not to say that boards are not interested in the truth. It's to say that sometimes the idea of what we think is going on is somehow a stronger idea than what may actually be going on. And so, if you are coming in, especially as a new CEO, and you're really understanding the landscape, and if the organization is in trouble or has challenges or what have you, you can almost guarantee the board doesn't really understand the depth of the situation, and that's not through any fault of their own. It's just because it's not their job to. And so there's always more going on inside than the board necessarily can see because they're just not set up to do that. So, but once you as the CEO come in and you look at that landscape and you really understand that and you evaluate that, then you're part of what you have to do is go back and engage the board in a truthful conversation about what's working, what's not working, because you need them to support you in the things that have to be done to get back on track. And if they don't really know what you're doing in that regard, or they don't understand the reason why you might need to do something, then they can't really support you very well. So you have to be able to go to your board and say, not just tell them what they want to hear, to tell them this is what's going on, and here is what I would like you to do to help me with this. Right? If you can't make requests of your board, then you probably don't have an effective relationship with your board. Now, which is not to say the board's going to just say, sure, absolutely, we'll do everything you ask, right? Because that doesn't always happen either. But you have to be able to say, give them an unvarnished assessment of what's going on, and have some trust that they'll be able to hear, if not all of it, most of it, right? That they'll be able to grasp the nature of the thing that you are struggling with, the organization is struggling with, or that needs change. And then, you've got to be able to ask them, you got to be able to help define their role in solving it. Even if it's only, there's nothing you can do, I just need you to know. Because when other choices come down the line that may be difficult, you know, your understanding this is a predicate to the actions that we're going to have to take later. And so, that being truthful, being able to make requests. If you can't do either of those things, then and you have no ability or no nothing, no sense that that's anywhere on the horizon, then you might want to look for another job. Because you're not going to be very effective with that board of directors, and you're probably not going to engage them in what they need to do to help make the organization stronger and better for the people you're serving.
And as you're going through that process that you just described, is it one-on-one meetings? Is it through committees, through board meetings? How would you recommend a CEO accomplish what you just articulated?
Yes, all of the above. Yes, Michael, it's all of that.
All the above.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think yeah, you do. You've got to build your own relationship with them. You've got to, and at the last two organizations where I was CEO, we had to redefine. We reshaped the board committees because the board committees were fit for purpose for an earlier iteration of the organization. Right? They made sense at one time, and based on where we were in both organizations, then they needed change, and so we went through the process of kind of redefining the remit and the charter of each of them, kind of renaming committees so that they were more focused on the things that we thought were appropriate for the board and where we wanted board input to really steer things, and so. You when you sit down, and then you get people working on the problem that the level and kind of problem that you want them working on. And if you don't do that, then there's room for mischief, right? Because sometimes people want to help, and they show up, and it's like, how can I help? And if you're not helping define what they're working on, then they may show up in lots of places, and that may not be a good use of their time, and it frankly may not be that helpful to you as the leader trying to get the team to do what it needs to do, and all of that sort of thing. So I do think you really need to work closely with your board to define roles, define activities, and get them focused on the level of problem that's going to help you and help the team do what it needs to do to make the organization better, stronger, and more effective. And that there's more art to that than there is science.
Very interesting. And so it kind of dovetail that into, I like to ask this question, preparing for board meetings. What do you recommend organizations, the CEO and staff do to prepare for a board meeting?
Um, I think having a set of one of the things that I like to do is to have a roughly a standing kind of agenda where there's a few things that you typically check in on, either every meeting or in a regular cadence. And so we started, defining, which meeting during the course of the year we would handle certain topics, and that we would really try to engage in, things like our risk register, for example, and we tried to align the work of the committees to provide outputs that would then feed into that board agenda. And and I mean, a lot of organizations where I've worked, we've come in and you'd kind of be reporting on things again that kind of made sense at the time. The board wanted to know about this, and so you find yourself reporting back. Um, and you do need to do some of that report out to the board because you're accountable to them. Um, but I'm also a big believer that you try to manage that space so that your report out time um, is not perhaps as much as the level of as the dialogue space that you want to engage your board in. If you can have your, I mean, this is sort of, I guess, a rough number. Like if you keep your reporting to 25-30% of what you need to do and reserve the rest of your time for strategic conversations, because if you've been able to invest time to create a great board and you've got all those people together, you want to get the most out of their brains, their contacts, their ideas, their thinking, their persons, because they're there for the right reasons. And so I'm a big believer that you report back on the things that are useful and important for them to know, so that they can meet their fiduciary duty or their duty of care or their role as the risk manager or the risk overseer. Um, but then carve out as much time as you can to have a strategic dialogue about where the organization is going and how they can help, or what the organization needs to do in order to get on the path that it wants to get on, and how they can help. And um, I think if you can get that balance right, you know, the right level of accountability, the right level of reporting, because you do report back and you report up, and they need to know that. But use more of the rest of that time, if possible, to have a strategic dialogue about what you can do together, because presumably they're your board because they are, they're this collective force that you can work with and through. They're great individuals, and as a collective, they're greater than the sum of their parts. And if you get them moving in that direction, then that can be really powerful. And your board meetings are often the best place to do that. Committee meetings are too small. One-on-one meetings, you can sort of pave the way for all of that. But when you get people together and the energy's high, and you've been, in the Netto board meetings, Michael, so you've seen some of that, that we did there. But this has been true of other organizations as well. You get people focused on that's, honestly, that's why they're there. They're not there to just check that the accounting is right, although they have to do that. And the balance sheet, adds up, although they have to do that. They're there for the mission. And you tap into their excitement about how we can do this better together, then that's an incredible place to be with your board. And I would encourage everybody to think about how you can facilitate that with the people who have volunteered their time. They're volunteers, that they volunteered their time and their energies, and how can you work with them to help them make the biggest and highest and best contribution they can while they're volunteering their time. And that's a good creative, meaty challenge that any CEO really should spend some time thinking about.
Well, you certainly have a clear understanding and appreciation for a board of directors and how it can leverage and help an organization, even their mindset as individuals wanting to support the organization, attending these meetings. So I appreciate what you said. And you have to do all of this while having a unique relationship with a board chair. So as a CEO, can you talk a little bit about that board chair CEO relationship? What makes it good, effective? How frequently do you maybe talk? And, just some of the things that a CEO out there ought to look for in a board chair.
I think it really varies from circumstance to circumstance. When I was leading CDP in North America, my board chair and I didn't have a standing time that we spoke, but I knew that whenever I needed him, I could call. I could always get on his calendar. We could always sit down and have a discussion. He had the advantage also of sitting on the global board in the UK. So CDP was not formally a federation, but we were, North America was sort of the largest of the international arms. We were the largest financial contributor. And the UK mothership, so to speak, was kind of held the brand, and so it was not federated in the same way that many of the NetHope nonprofits are federated, but it was a very similar model. And he had the advantage of really having insights into what was going on in the UK board. And so we could talk about that and really try to triangulate. And so that was much more of an ad hoc. I'm here when you need me, and call me when you do. And if you don't, and in periods when I don't, I might not talk to him for 2 months. And that worked out just fine. Now, when I came on board at NetHope, Farhan Irshad, who was my board chair at that time, was saying, "Well, I think we should meet every week." And I agreed with him because I think because we had some work to do to help get the organization back on track. And so Farhan and I every morning, usually at a very early hour because his days started early. He at the time was CFO, COO for a large refugee organization, and so was also working. They were working all over the world. And so we'd have a regular early call, and we would do that weekly. And that was the right cadence. That was the right tool for that particular challenge. And so I think you can do it anyway. I think you just have to make sure that, again, you're in a position to be able to talk to your board chair about the conversation that you need to have. If you're waiting for the board chair to set the agenda, I mean, and occasionally they can and they will and they should, but more often than not, really, you need to manage up, so to speak. And I think this is true, actually. It's true of a lot of staff, especially mid-level staff and senior. This is true at multiple levels in the organization. That just happens to be true of the CEO and board chair as well. That you need to be in the habit of actually bringing an agenda to the meeting. And what that does is which is not to say that everything that you bring to the table is going to be the sole topic of discussion, but what it does is it helps the person who you have to report into understand the nature of what you're trying to solve. And obviously, if they've got an agenda, well, then you flip over and you deal with that too. Everybody gets time to talk, and everybody gets the ability to do that. But I find that if you're, and I've done this ever since I was a mid-level manager. I've always brought an agenda to the meeting, and that we get to all of my things. Sometimes we got to none of my things, but I always had an agenda, and if we got the opportunity, these are things I wanted to talk about, because then that gave me the ability to engage other people in helping me solve the problem. Because usually, I mean, in so many things in life, you don't have the ability. I have the command lever. I'm just going to pull this lever or push that button, and suddenly problem solved, and we didn't need anybody else to do anything. Usually, it involves consultation over here and engagement over here and preparation over here. And that's true in companies also, by the way. It's not just, I mean, there's a particularly kind of tortured version of that in the not-for-profit world that happens because it's a multi-stakeholder environment. But this is true in companies also, where I've worked both in consulting firms and in corporate America, and so you get a chance to really start to engage some of that machinery and get other people engaged in helping solve the problem, partly because maybe you've helped them see it's also their problem. Right? If they define it as like just your thing, then you're probably not going to get a whole lot of help in doing it. But if you can help them understand how this affects them and their work and the thing that they're dealing with, or maybe, well, I call it by this name, but you called it by that name, but it's basically the same underlying issue. Can we work together to do something about that? Suddenly, that's much more powerful, right? And so that managing up piece, I think, is true if you're a mid-level manager, but it's also true if you're a CEO working with your board chair, because that time is precious. They don't want to waste their time. You don't want to waste your time. Talk about something that's useful to both of you. And if there's, and I'm also a big proponent of this, if there's no reason to meet or the meeting is over, but gosh, we've got an extra 15 minutes. Let's just, talk about things until we close. Don't do that. Just if conversation's over or there's no need for the meeting, don't have the meeting and end the conversation, because your time is much more precious than that, and everybody's time is much more precious than that. So those are some thoughts that I've had that, so far have seemed to work reasonably well.
Well, it seems to have been, because you've been very successful. So last question. So there's a new CEO out there somewhere starting his or her job today or in the near future. You've done this a number of times. You come in. What advice do you give, or a roadmap for that first 100 days? That seems to be some miracle number that we've come up with, that first 100 days. But how might they approach the task at hand?
So every leadership role that I have come into, I've been presented with an outline of here's what's going on, and here are the people, and here's the situation, and go. And so you get there, and always, it is either incomplete, insufficiently realized, described in some way that you have no idea how to get leverage around the problem, or it's just plain wrong, right? It's just wrong, not because because it's often written by people who are not on the inside of the issue. So now, so recognizing there are going to be varying degrees of accuracy in what you've received, then you need to look at that, read it, understand it, because somebody went to the trouble to write it up for you or to prepare it for you or to brief you on it. So, and then put that aside and go find out what's really going on. Go understand it in your own terms and relate that back to the key stakeholders, whether that's, paraphrasing, repeating, did I understand you correctly, right? And kind of map that out with all of the people involved. It's going to be, because your staff are going to be, and there are different departments in your staff that are going to have a point of view on that. Your board's going to have a point of view on that. Your leadership team is going to have a point of view on that. The people you're trying to help are going to have a point of view on that. And that was particularly salient in a couple of the organizations I've worked for, particularly NetHope, because there were member organizations who were part of the service population. This was also true, frankly, when I worked at some of the investor organizations as well. We had investors that were quasi-members or companies who were partners in some way. And NetHope, of course, had corporate partners also. So you have to go put together your own picture based on that kind of aggregate map, and then build your own way of understanding how you're going to solve the problem. And then you have to hypothesis test that. You got to go back and kind of check that out with the key people and say, I think if we did this, and this, these things might be possible. And then you find out, well, no, that's not possible, because in our organization, it's always worked like this. And other groups may be able to do this, but we can't because of fill in the blank. So you do get sometimes, there are structural reasons why organizations can't seem to get out of certain patterns. because it's hardwired into their governance, it's hardwired into the way they operate, it's hardwired into sort of their constituent services. And so and those also sometimes are just taken for granted because, like, well, of course we know that, we've all worked here for 7 years. Well, of course, you didn't know, nobody told you that. It's like, well, no, and nobody thought to, because so you really have to go through, map the problem for yourself, hypothesis test it to make sure that, because there will be things that you will miss, and that first 100 days is really, kind of a listening tour. You just have to go hear everybody out, and decide which of those points of view and complaints are either more material than others for moving the organization forward, and which are just good things that you should know because it's going on in your organization, you should know about it. But solving that isn't going to change anything. It might make some people more happy or more effective. So in that sense, it's useful, but it may not be what you need to focus on initially. So you've got to build that map for yourself, and you got to go test that hypothesis with your board. You test it with your leadership team. And if they see that you're kind of getting it, because there's a trust thing also when you come in, people give you a certain amount of benefit of the doubt, or they defer in fear because they think, well, this is the person who can fire me. So, right. And that's, useful about that much, right? Because it only gets you so far. People give you the benefit of the doubt when you come in, but if you don't prove that you're worthy of their trust, then they're not going to have any time for you. So you have to work together to kind of build your own picture first, then work as a group to build that picture, and then suddenly, you've got to, if there's agreement around that, then suddenly you're in a position where you can say, well, all of us then now can start to, if we all agreement about this set of things, we've all got a role for how we might do something about that, and then you can get the group moving in that direction. And that's what you've got to do. The whole organization has really got to be moving in the direction of solving the same handful of strategic challenges, the same handful of resource challenges, the same handful of operational challenges, the same handful of constituent impact challenges. But you're going to have to build that, because it's almost certain that consensus doesn't exist. And you have to be the holder of that. You have to be the communicator of that. You have to tell the story back to people in terms that they can understand, and in a way that they can see what their role might be in solving it. And I found if you can do those things, then suddenly that unlocks things for people, because then they start to see possibilities. They start to see, like, I have a play. Okay, this used to be just a thing we bang our heads against the wall about and couldn't get anything done around. Now there may be a way to do this, and if I do it with this other team or these other folks, suddenly that becomes pretty exciting, because then there's a chance to make some lasting change. But it all starts with you really going in, listening, building that map for yourself, and testing it, and validating it or invalidating it as you may need to do from time to time. And then you've got a basis to sort of bring people together.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen, a 100-day roadmap from Lance Pierce. Lance actually articulated that very, very well, and I appreciate you doing that. Lance, you've been such a pillar in the nonprofit community, a leader. Any final words you'd like to share with the audience?
I think the not-for-profit sector in the United States, but also internationally, has entered a period of great change. Some of that is about resources, because there's funding has been cut in the United States. It's being cut in Europe as well. So this is the U.S. is not alone in cutting back in funding for a whole variety of domestic and international purposes here. It's happening in Europe as well. Companies are being asked to fill in the gaps. Private foundations and philanthropy are being asked to fill in the gaps. And it's likely the case that the gaps, when government pulls back, it's likely, and government everywhere, again, not just in the United States, pulls back, it's likely the case that the gap is too large for the other two constituencies to really fill it adequately. So I think that's going to compel organizations to get very focused on what they do, how they do it, and who they're serving. I think I think some organizations are not going to exist, and other organizations are going to reinvent themselves in ways that continue to serve environmental good and human needs because those are permanent and enduring, and the sector exists in many cases to serve that and a whole variety of adjacent other issues. So organizations, I think, are going to be compelled to change in ways perhaps that they have not, at least in my working life. And so I think being prepared for that, and it sounds cliche to say it, but recognizing that there is opportunity there. I don't say that in a way to sort of gloss over the fact that it would, it's going to be painful if some number of organizations are not able to function as well as they did formerly or at all. But I think there is opportunity, and I think the organizations that there will be organizations that are going to come out of this stronger, that are going to be serving their constituencies better. And I think doing everything you can do to really understand that landscape, adapt your model, whether it's your business model, your operating model, your income model, your service model, whatever it might be, really leaning into that and taking that task seriously, that project seriously, I think it will behoove all of us to be able to do that because by the end of the decade, the sector will be different. We can't quite know what that's going to look like, but it seems pretty clear if current trends hold that that we'll be in a different space. And my sincere hope is that the organizations that are operating then in the next few years are better at what they do, stronger at what they do, and that gives the basis, frankly, for them to scale up. Because if you're doing good work, if you're not doing good work in the first place, it's hard to have a basis for scale. But if you've reinvented yourself and you're doing good work in the real world circumstances in which you have to operate, that gives you the best platform for scale that you could imagine, because you're going to go back to your donors and be able to say, here are the results. And we've done this in the current operating environment. Support us to a greater degree because we can help more people and more places if you help us do that. So I think for those organizations that really lean into that strongly, I think they are going to be stronger and better for it. And my sincere hope is we find ways to help them and their models help more people and more places along the way.
Lance Pierce, thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise with the audience today. It's been a pleasure having you on the I-501CU podcast.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Always good to see you, my friend, and I look forward to following up in the real world, in IRL, very soon. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Lance. Wow, that's a tough one, Reed. This is Recapping with Reed, ladies and gentlemen. Reed has to come up with three main takeaways from this interview, and Lance probably had 50. But, Reed, give it to us. Number one.
I was going to say, this is not a come up with three takeaways. This is a narrow it down to three takeaways, and most of these are going to be multi-parters. So here's the first one. What makes an effective nonprofit board member? They understand and prioritize their duty of care. They prioritize the fiduciary role. They oversee the family of risks. They are not the risk manager, but they understand all the risks associated with the organization, and they understand the difference between governance and management.
Nice. Number two.
I liked what Lance said when suggesting, when he was talking about the working with the board as the CEO, and he said if you can't make requests of your board, you probably don't have an effective relationship with that board. And part of that is defining their role in solving the problem. Don't come to them with just a problem. Let them know what it is that you want from them. Maybe it is just to listen or just for them to know about this. But if you can't make requests of your board, that is a problem.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And number three.
Talking specifically about board meetings, he likes to have about 30% of time for an agenda item to be allocated for the report out, and then 70% for that discussion, that strategic discussion, because that is really the value that you get from your board members. They are the experts. You have them on your board for a reason. You shouldn't just be reporting out to them for the entire meeting.
Well, Reed, Corley, ironically, those were my top 3 as well. So excellent job on those takeaways. I don't know how you narrowed it down to 3, but excellent job. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, recapping with Reed, and we will I-501 see you next week.